Hello there, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our first subsection from Section 12, the Stagnant 70s. We're going to examine America in free fall, okay? Remember, we are leaving the Nixon years, okay? We have gone through the 50s and the majority of the 60s with a vast majority of our population experiencing a certain level of economic affluency and prosperity. Our nation has been doing good. Remember, we had all those assumptions that we would always be number one, American exceptionalism. We're the bastion of hope, freedom, liberty, and capitalism. Everything's always going to be awesome. However, okay, remember, we've studied three major entities, phenomena / events that took place through the middle 60s to the early 70s that for the most part caused America to rip apart at the seams. The hostility and the ever growing angst associated with the civil rights movement, the Vietnam affair, the why and the lies that surrounded that effort to stop the expansion of communism in Asia, and then the Watergate scandal at the highest level of authority in regards to governance in the land. We've got corruption. Okay, so there is an extreme level from all of those tumultuous situations, all right, playing out over the better part of a decade. There is an extreme level of pessimism, an extreme level of distrust, and in general, just gloom that the American psyche is experiencing. So by the time we get to Gerald R. Ford taking over the presidency with Nixon's resignation, Americans are exhausted, right? A decade of pessimism, critique, analysis, and distrust regarding their government. A decade of the civil rights movement having some enormous achievements, but yet really experiencing a ton of equality and equity in reality. And then this, international affair that seemed to be a no-win situation, Vietnam. Americans are exhausted, and we're really starting to wonder, looking a bit introspectively here at what it means to be an American and just how amazing our nation is. Now, we get to a point here in 73, 74, and rolling through the rest of the 70s where now we're going to sprinkle in a little bit of economic distress. So we've got the social and political struggles, okay? On top of that, over the next decade, Americans are going to see their economy tumble. We are going to experience the worst economic situation since the Great Depression. It's interesting that we're covering this now as what we're currently experiencing with the coronavirus event is a great big question mark on how this is essentially going to affect our short-term and long-term economy here in the US of A and globally. Because we've experienced 3 years of phenomenal economic and industrial growth here in the US of A in comparison to the previous decade. So it's worth noting the information here from this section as it could very well, parallel our current situation. So the American economy is going to tumble, and by the end of the 1970s, many Americans are wondering, is the age of American exceptionalism, American greatness on the international stage, is that era over? And many Americans, all right, judging by the poll, judging by the surveys, are like, yeah, it's not that great to be an American anymore. So the 70s collectively, a decade that was draining for the American psyche, a decade that was following a bunch of social and political strife, a decade that's going to see a lot of economic turmoil and a lot of economic distress. And it's just kind of one of those, oh my gosh, what can happen next types of situations. The individual that has to inherit this mess is Gerald R. Ford, our doubly accidental president. If you remember, Spiro Agnew had to resign from the vice presidency because he was going to be charged with tax evasion and some other crimes as the Watergate scandal plays out in the early 1970s. Gerald R. Ford comes from the U.S. House of Representatives. He was a congressperson from Grand Rapids, Michigan. He takes over the vice presidency thinking that he can, provide a certain level of integrity, credibility to the administration at a time when everybody was just extremely distrustful of the Nixon cabinet. Lo and behold, Nixon resigns, and ta-da, Gerald R. Ford becomes the president of the United States of America. An absolutely enormously difficult situation to inherit. Not the worst by any means, okay? Historically speaking, in the US of A, there have been more tumultuous times. But boy, another, for the most part, no-win situation. However, as we've talked about in other sections of study, if there was a person that had the character, that had the attitude, that had the personality that Americans needed to serve as president at this time of just exhaustion, disgust, distrust, inquiry of just how good America is, it's Gerald R. Ford. All right. This is a person that served in World War II, was an All-American football star at the University of Michigan, got his law degree, was apprehensive to get into politics, but eventually did, and was a phenomenal servant to his constituents in the Grand Rapids, Michigan district. But, okay, he's not necessarily the person to guide America through the turmoil, especially some of the economic troubles that start to settle in. He's a good placeholder, all right? He's got the right, personality. But in terms of making those hard decisions and getting Americans to support some of the difficult decisions, to get through some of the difficult times, Gerald R. Ford is not that guy. He does not set himself up for success very early on as president, as he is going to pardon Richard Milhous Nixon. What does that mean? As president, he is going to legally absolve him of his crimes. So basically say, we are not going to prosecute nor convict, okay, Richard Milhous Nixon of obstruction of justice and any other crimes that Congress was going to bring upon him. This is not well received by many Americans. Many Americans wanted to see Richard Milhous Nixon drug across the coals and brought forth before our American criminal justice system and charged and convicted with the crimes that he committed. On the other side of that, where many Americans thought that may have been cathartic, right? Like that might have been a way to exorcise some of the demons and move on, officially providing closure to this dark chapter in American politics. The other side of the coin is many Americans thought, whoa, this has already been a big enough stain on American society, American governance. This has already been a dark enough chapter in American history. It's time to move on. And that's what Ford effectively notes as he controversially, pardons RMN shortly after taking the presidency in 1974. It, for the most part, historians would tell you, cost him the election in 1976. We're going to flash forward 2 more years. Ford's going to get the Republican nomination for the presidency in the summer of 1976. He's going to have a tough race against Ronald Reagan, but he's going to get that. And then many Americans can't get over the fact of what he did 2 years prior, okay? And that's going to cost him at the polls in 1976. But retrospectively looking back at this, all right, little revisionist history, many historians would tell you that it was the right thing to do. It was a time for national healing, a time to move forward, move on. We've got bigger fish to fry. Nixon has stepped aside. A lot of the other individuals that were associated with the crimes and the corruption have also been excised from the national government. So it's time to move forward. Gerald R. Ford, again, the right guy to do this, okay, in terms of attitude, personality, integrity. But it's not necessarily the most popular things amongst the masses in America, even though many of the middle-of-the-road, moderate, logical, rational Americans could see why he was doing it. There were a lot of Americans that still wanted to see RMN proverbially hang, all right, for his crimes and corrupt acts as president. This is in the Google Slides. This is the actual news footage of Gerald R. Ford's pardon. Okay, so when he announces to the nation from the Oval Office that he's going to pardon Richard Nixon. For the sake of the video's time length, I'm going to let you watch this on your own. Same thing with the next slide, which is our 62nd president, Gerald R. Ford. So it's going to review some of the stuff that I just walked you through, and then it's going to go ahead and give you some foreshadowing of what's to come in the rest of 74, 75, and 76. during the Ford administration. That does it for this subsection of notes, America and Freefall. We'll pick it up with the economic spiral in our next subsection video.